one forbidden night tied their souls. Years later, he returned not just for her love, but for the child he never knew they had. The summer moon hung low, swollen in silver, casting a glow upon the desert plain. The air smelled of juniper smoke and dust, of wild sage crushed underfoot. Somewhere in the dark distance, coyotes sang their restless song. But near the edge of the settlement, hidden among the shadows of a grove, a girl stood still as if waiting for the night itself to breathe her forward. Her name was Clara, barely 17. She was known for her quiet eyes and gentle ways, a girl her father called pure as mountain snow to her people. She was the symbol of what should be guarded, a virgin untouched by the world's dangers. But Clara's heart had already crossed lines she dared not speak of. For weeks, she had felt the weight of unseen eyes. In the woods, while gathering water. At dusk, when the sky bled fire over the mesas. She should have feared him, the Apache warrior who sometimes lingered in the shadows, the one whispered about in her town as savage and untamable. Yet her fear had been swallowed by something far more dangerous, curiosity. And then, desire. That night, when she slipped from her father's cabin, barefoot on the cool earth, she knew she was not running from anything. She was running toward him. He was there, waiting. His name was Dakota, meaning friend to all, though his enemies never spoke it kindly. He stood tall, shoulders broad, his chest painted with streaks of ash and ochre from some ritual long past. The moonlight revealed his strength, the curve of his jaw, the black fall of his hair bound with a strip of leather. His dark eyes, sharp as a hawk's, softened when they fell on her. "Why did you come?" His voice was low, carrying the weight of rivers and storms. Clara's breath caught. She had no practiced answer, only the truth. "Because I could not stay away." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with the unspoken dangers. Her father would cast her out if he knew. His people would scorn him for touching a settler girl. The world would never forgive them. Yet in that silence, they felt the pull of something older than law, older than war, a hunger carved into their souls before either had drawn breath. Dakota stepped closer. His hand, rough and scarred from battles fought in defense of his people, lifted as though uncertain he should touch her. Clara tilted her face toward him, her lashes trembling. The first brush of his fingers against her cheek was a lightning strike, so soft, yet it burned through her veins. "You are not meant for me," he whispered. Her lips trembled, but her voice was steady. "Maybe I was only meant for you." That was all it took. In one heartbeat, the space between them dissolved. His mouth found hers, not with gentleness, but with the fierce desperation of a man who had denied himself too long. She clung to him as though the world could vanish beneath her feet and only his arms could keep her from falling. The night became their witness. Beneath the canopy of stars, they gave themselves to each other without hesitation, without thought of tomorrow. For Clara, it was surrender of innocence, of fear, of everything she thought she was. For Dakota, it was reverence every kiss, every touch an offering to the woman who had stepped across the boundary of two worlds for him. She wept, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming ache of a love too vast to fit inside her chest. He pressed his forehead to hers, whispering words in Apache she could not understand, yet their meaning sank into her soul. Mine, always mine. Hours passed like minutes. And when the horizon bled pink with dawn, reality returned. Clara woke with her head on his chest, her hand tangled in his hair. For a moment, she let herself believe this would last, that the world could be remade by what they had shared. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw it, the knowledge that their night had been both a beginning and an ending. "I must go," he said, his voice breaking against the morning wind. Her throat tightened. "Will I see you again?" He pressed a kiss to her temple, lingering there as if trying to etch her into his very being. The spirits guide where they will. If they are kind, yes. Then, like a shadow retreating from the sun, he was gone, leaving Clara with nothing but the memory of his touch, the warmth of his body still clinging to hers, and a heart that would never again belong to anyone else. The days after Dakota's departure felt like walking inside a dream Clara could not wake from. The world moved around her, chores to tend, meals to cook, sermons at the small wooden church, but her heart was still caught in the echo of one night beneath the stars. She touched her lips when no one was watching, remembering the taste of him. She pressed her hand to her chest and felt the hollow ache where he had been at first. She thought the ache was only grief, only longing. But as the weeks turned into months, her body betrayed her. Her morning sickness was a storm that rose with the dawn, leaving her weak and pale. Her dresses grew tighter across her waist, and though she tried to hide it, the truth revealed itself. Clara was carrying Dakota's child. Shame and fear pressed on her like a crushing weight. In her settlement, purity was a girl's currency. A woman without virtue was a woman without worth, no matter her heart. Her father, a stern man hardened by years of struggle on the frontier, spoke often of honor, obedience, and the punishment of sin. If he discovered the truth, his anger would be like fire. The whispers of the townsfolk would be sharper still, every glance a dagger, every laugh a wound. But none of that frightened Clara as much as the loneliness. She longed for Dakota with every heartbeat, yet he had vanished into the wilderness, swallowed by the life of his people. She had no way to find him, no way to tell him he had left behind not just her heart, but his blood. She dreamed of him often, of his voice calling her name, of his strong hands cradling their child. But every morning she woke to the silence of absence. By the time the truth could no longer be hidden, Clara's father already knew. His face went white when he saw her rounded belly, then red with fury. He did not need to ask who the father was. Her shame was written in the boy's dark hair and wild eyes once he came into the world. "You've brought ruin upon us," he spat, the night her son was born. "Your name will never again be spoken without disgrace." Her father did not strike her, but the absence of tenderness was worse than any blow. He turned his back when she wept. He refused to touch the baby as though the child carried a plague. To him, the boy was a living reminder of betrayal, a wound that would never close. The townspeople were no kinder. Women pulled their daughters away when Clara walked past. Men muttered words like fallen and unclean. Children pointed and whispered, cruel in their innocence. Yet in the midst of their cruelty, Clara found a love fiercer than any she had known. The moment she held her son in her arms, tiny and perfect, with a cry that pierced the stillness of the night, something in her soul ignited. He had Dakota's strength in the set of his jaw, her softness in the curve of his lips. She named him Samuel after her grandfather, though in her heart she whispered another name, a name she had never dared speak aloud since that night. Dakota's son. Every hardship, every whisper, every punishment from her father Clara bore it all for Samuel. She rocked him when he cried, sang to him when her throat was raw, shielded him when cruel tongues lashed at his heritage. And in his dark eyes, alive with fire, she saw the man she had loved only once but forever. Still, the weight of her secret was heavy. When Samuel asked about his father, she told him only, "He was brave. He was strong. And he loved you before he ever knew you." She never told him the whole truth, that his father had been an Apache warrior, that their love had been both forbidden and sacred. Fear chained her tongue, even as love filled her heart. Each night, after Samuel had drifted to sleep, Clara would sit by the window and gaze out at the desert horizon. She wondered if Dakota still lived. She wondered if he thought of her, or if he had buried her memory as one buries the dead. She prayed that the wind carried her longing across the miles, that somehow he felt the pull of the bond they had forged, but seasons turned. Samuel grew, the whispers never ceased, and Dakota did not return. Clara's heart carried the memory of that night like a secret flame, beautiful, dangerous, and eternal. And though she smiled for her son, though she stood tall in the face of judgment, inside she was a woman torn in two, one half bound to duty and shame, the other forever aching for the man who had once made her feel whole. Samuel grew as the desert itself grew, wild, unyielding, and shaped by forces both tender and harsh. From the moment he could walk, he ran barefoot across the hard earth, chasing lizards and tumbling into the tall grass, laughter spilling from him like sunlight. His skin, darker than the other children's, glowed with the warmth of his Apache blood, and his black hair refused to stay neat no matter how often Clara tried to comb it flat. She adored him. Every smile, every question, every stubborn tilt of his chin filled her with pride. He carried Dakota's spirit in his bones, and though she rarely spoke the name, she saw the warrior in the boy's every step. Sometimes, when Samuel's eyes gleamed beneath the moonlight, it was as if Dakota himself had returned for a moment, watching her through their child. But the world saw differently. The settlement children noticed Samuel's differences long before they understood them. "Half-blood," they whispered. "Savage's boy." They jeered when his mother wasn't near, shoved him in the mud, and mocked the sharpness of his features. Samuel, fiery as the desert sun, never backed down. He fought back with his fists and his teeth, fearless even when outnumbered. Clara often found him home with a split lip or a bruised cheek, and though she scolded him gently, part of her swelled with pride. "You mustn't fight," she told him once, cupping his face with tender hands. "They call me names," Samuel said, his small voice raw with hurt. "They say I don't belong." Her heart broke, as it had so many times before. She kissed his brow, rocking him against her chest. "You belong with me, always. You are my heart." But in the quiet of night, when Samuel slept peacefully, Clara wept alone. She knew the cruel truth. No matter how fiercely she loved him, the world would never let him forget what he was. He was the child of two nations, yet welcomed by neither. Her father, who still treated her with cold distance, ignored Samuel entirely. He could not even look at the boy. It was as if Samuel's very existence was a wound that never closed. Clara often prayed her father might soften with time, but years passed, and his bitterness grew only deeper. Still, Samuel thrived beneath Clara's love. He was quick to laugh, eager to learn, and brimming with curiosity. He loved stories, especially when Clara told him tales of stars and rivers, of warriors and heroes, though she disguised the truth of his father within them. Sometimes she caught Samuel staring at the horizon, his eyes filled with the restless yearning of someone who felt a call he could not name. "Why do you look at the mountains like that?" she asked one evening as they sat outside their cabin. "Because they're calling me," he said softly, pointing at the jagged peaks. "I feel it in here." He pressed a small hand to his chest. Her breath caught. That same hunger had once burned in Dakota's eyes. It was the pull of the land, the voice of a heritage Samuel had never been told was his. Clara's heart clenched with fear. She wanted to keep him safe, close, hidden from the dangers of a world that would never accept him fully. Yet she knew she could never smother the spirit that lived inside him. The older Samuel grew, the harder it became to protect him from the whispers. By the time he was 10, the children's cruelty had sharpened into something darker. Adults sneered openly now. "The squaw's boy," they muttered. "Wild blood. He'll bring trouble." Samuel heard it all, and though he tried to hide his pain, Clara saw it. Each wound struck deeper, leaving scars she could not heal. She held him tighter, loved him harder, prayed louder, but the burden of his two worlds weighed heavier each year, and always. Behind her love, behind her fear, lingered the memory of Dakota. If only he were here, Samuel would know he belonged. If only he were here, the boy would see himself reflected in a father's pride, not just a mother's love. But Dakota was gone. So Clara carried the secret like a stone in her chest. Her son was not only hers, but also the legacy of a man who had vanished into the wild, leaving behind blood that burned in the veins of a boy who already longed for more than she could give. And deep down, Clara knew this truth: someday Samuel would need answers she could not keep hidden. Someday he would demand to know who he was, and she would have no choice but to tell him. Time moved like the desert wind, sometimes howling, sometimes still, but always carrying things away. Samuel grew taller, his voice deepening, his shoulders broadening, until Clara could hardly believe the boy she once cradled was now a young man. Yet with every inch he gained, with every year that slipped past, the silence of Dakota's absence grew heavier, like a stone pressing against Clara's heart. She had hoped, in those first years, that Dakota would return, that one day, out of the horizon, he would appear with the same fierce eyes and gentle hands, claiming her and their son with the strength of a man who had never forgotten. But the seasons came and went, the winters harsh, the summers unrelenting, and still he did not come. Clara buried her longing deep. Outwardly, she smiled, worked, prayed, and raised Samuel with every drop of love she had to give. But in the quiet moments, when the candle burned low and the world was still, she allowed herself to ache. Sometimes she pressed her face into Dakota's old leather strip, the one he had left behind, and breathed in the faint scent of him, as if the memory alone could keep her alive. Samuel, too, began to notice the silence. "Mama," he asked one night, his young voice heavy with a man's questions, "where is my father?" Her throat tightened. She had rehearsed 100 answers, but none felt strong enough to bear the truth. "He was brave," she said softly, stroking Samuel's dark hair. "And he loved you before he ever saw your face." "That isn't what I asked." His eyes narrowed, sharp with the fire of youth. "Why isn't he here?" The question cut her in two. For a moment, she could almost see Dakota's face in Samuel's anger, the same piercing gaze, the same refusal to accept half-truths. Clara's chest burned, but she swallowed her grief. "Sometimes," she whispered, "life doesn't give us what we want. Sometimes love can't stay." Samuel looked away, his jaw tight. "Then I don't need him," he muttered. But Clara heard the lie in his voice. The years stretched on, filled with moments of beauty and pain. Samuel became strong, quicker with his hands than most of the boys in town, sharper of mind, braver of spirit. He worked the land beside Clara, hunted when food ran low, and defended her when whispers turned cruel. Yet there was always a restlessness in him, a hunger for something beyond the borders of their small settlement. Clara saw it each time he lingered at the edge of the desert, staring into the horizon as though searching for someone he had never met. She feared what he might do when the pull became too strong. Would he leave her? Would he vanish into the mountains, searching for a father who might never return? Her own fears grew heavier with age. The settlement's judgment never faded. Some women still crossed the street to avoid her. Men still muttered of sin and shame when she passed. And though Samuel stood tall beside her, unashamed of who he was, Clara bore the weight of their scorn like stones sewn into her dress. Still, she endured for him. Always for him. And yet, in the stillness of night, she allowed herself to dream. In her dreams, Dakota returned. He would appear at her door, his hair longer, his body scarred but strong, his eyes filled with the same fierce devotion she had once known. He would hold Samuel in his arms, whispering his pride, and then turn to her, claiming her with the fire of a love that had never faded. But every dawn betrayed her. She woke alone. The silence of Dakota's absence became a presence all its own. It sat beside her at the table. It lay with her at night. It watched Samuel grow into a man and whispered reminders of what could have been. And so Clara lived between two truths: the joy of raising a son who was her entire world, and the sorrow of knowing half his soul was missing. She learned to smile when she wanted to weep, to speak when she wanted to scream, to carry on when every part of her longed to collapse into memory. Years of silence passed, but deep inside, the flame never died. She still loved him, still waited, even when she told herself it was foolish. For though the world had hardened her heart, one part of her refused to surrender, the part that believed Dakota would come back. Someday. The day began like any other sun burning white above the desert, wind carrying dust through the settlement streets, life trudging forward in its weary rhythm. Clara was at the well, filling her bucket, her mind heavy with the same endless thoughts. Samuel's restless spirit, the townsfolk's whispers, the ache of years gone without him. Always without him. She bent to lift the bucket when she felt it, before she saw, before she heard. A shift in the air as if the earth itself held its breath. Her skin prickled. Slowly, she lifted her gaze toward the horizon, and there he was, a lone figure on horseback, cutting across the desert like a shadow born of fire and stone. His hair was longer now, streaked with dust and wind. His body bore the marks of battles survived, the scars of a man who had fought too hard too long. Yet even from a distance, Clara knew him. Her heart, which had lain silent for so many years, leapt against her ribs. The bucket slipped from her hands, water spilling into the dust. She stood frozen, breath locked in her chest as he rode closer. Townsfolk stopped in their tracks, murmurs rising like a storm. Mothers pulled their children close, men reached for their rifles, suspicion in their eyes. An Apache warrior had returned to their gates, and not just any warrior. This one rode with the bearing of a man who feared nothing, who came not as a shadow but as a storm. Clara's knees trembled. She wanted to run, to hide, to throw herself into his arms all at once. Years of silence fell away in a single heartbeat. He was older, hardened by time, but the fire in his eyes was the same. The fire that had once consumed her beneath the stars. He dismounted, every movement deliberate, powerful. Dust swirled at his boots as he stepped into the settlement, ignoring the muttered warnings, the sharp glances. His gaze searched only for her dot, and when their eyes met, Clara's world broke open. "Dakota," she whispered. Though her voice was lost in the noise around them, he crossed the distance between them, his chest rising and falling as if he had run miles. When he finally stood before her, the silence between them roared louder than any sound. For a moment, neither spoke. They only looked at the years etched into each other's faces, at the love and pain and longing that time had not dimmed. "I thought you were dead," Clara breathed, tears burning her eyes. "I should have been," he answered, his voice rough with dust and memory. "But I lived. And every breath, every battle, every mile. I carried you with me." The world around them seemed to vanish. The murmurs of the town, the glares of suspicion, the rifles half raised, none of it mattered. It was only them, two souls bound by a night that had never released its hold. Then came the voice that shattered the spell. "Mother?" Clara turned. Samuel stood at the edge of the crowd, tall now, nearly a man grown. His black hair fell into his eyes, his jaw set with questions he had asked 1,000 times. But in that moment, all questions were answered. His gaze moved from Clara to Dakota, and his breath caught as recognition struck him like lightning. Dakota looked at Samuel, and the warrior's composure faltered. For the first time, his eyes softened, wide with shock and awe. He stepped forward, his hands trembling as though afraid to reach, afraid the boy would vanish if he touched him. "My son," he whispered, the words breaking from his chest like a prayer. Samuel stiffened, his face a storm of emotions, anger, wonder, longing. "You!" his voice cracked. "You're my father." Dakota dropped to one knee, his hands open, his head bowed as if before a sacred altar. "Yes, and I have wronged you by my absence. But I am here now. I swear it on the blood in my veins, I will never leave you again." The settlement held its breath. Clara's heart pounded as she watched father and son face one another, two halves of a whole finally joined. Tears blurred her vision, but she did not hide them. She had prayed for this moment, dreamed of it through years of silence. Now it was real, and it shook her to her core. Samuel's fists clenched. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he took a step closer. His voice was low, uncertain, but filled with something fierce. "Then prove it." And in that moment, Clara knew their lives would never again be what they had been. Dakota had returned, not as a ghost of memory, but as a living force. A father, a lover, a man come to claim the family he had left behind. The night after Dakota's return was thick with silence. Not the silence of emptiness Clara had endured for years, but a silence heavy with questions, with unspoken words hanging like storm clouds. Samuel sat at the table, his arms crossed, his jaw locked tight. Across from him, Dakota's broad frame seemed too large for the small cabin, his presence filling every corner. Clara moved between them, heart pulled in two directions, between the man she had once given her soul to and the boy who was her soul made flesh. The fire crackled in the hearth. Shadows danced across the walls, but no one spoke. At last, Samuel broke the silence. "Where were you?" His voice was sharp, a blade forged by years of longing. "All this time you left her. You left me." Dakota's gaze did not falter. "I was fighting," he said, his tone steady but low. "My people needed me. Every day, death followed us. I thought if I returned, I would bring that death to you." Samuel's fists slammed against the table. "So you thought we were better off without you? You thought a boy grows into a man with nothing but whispers and lies?" His eyes burned, and in them Clara saw the storm of a child who had grown up half empty, always searching for the missing piece of himself. Clara reached out, laying a hand on her son's arm. "Samuel." But he pulled away, rising to his feet. His voice trembled with fury. "I don't know you. You're just a ghost that showed up too late." The words struck Dakota harder than any blade. His shoulders sagged, but his eyes remained fixed on his son. "You are right. I have no claim to you. But blood calls to blood, and I cannot turn away now. I see myself in you." Samuel laughed bitterly. "You don't know me. Then let me," Dakota said, his voice rough, almost pleading. "Let me learn who you are. Let me show you who I am. A man is not whole without his son." The words hung in the air, raw and trembling with truth. Clara's chest ached. For years she had dreamed of this moment, of father and son standing face to face. But she had not imagined the anger, the pain, the jagged edge of their reunion. Samuel turned away, pacing the small room like a caged wolf. His breath came heavy, his shoulders tense. At last he spun back, eyes sharp as flint. "If you're really my father, prove it." Dakota stood slowly, the firelight catching the scars across his chest. "I will, not with words, but with my life. Whatever it takes." For a moment, neither moved. Then Samuel's expression cracked, just slightly. Beneath the fury, Clara saw the boy she had raised, the boy who had once cried at night for a father he had never known, the boy who had stared at the mountains as if they held the answer to his restless heart. That boy was still inside him, aching for what he had been denied, but hurt is not so easily undone. Samuel's voice softened, though anger still threaded through it. "You can't erase the years. You can't erase what you went through." He gestured to Clara, his eyes flashing with fierce protectiveness. "She carried me alone. She bore their shame. Where were you when they called her names? When they looked at me like I was less than human?" Dakota lowered his head, his voice hoarse. I was not here, and it will be my greatest regret until the day I die. But if you will let me, I will carry that burden with you. With both of you." Clara's breath caught. For so long she had carried the weight alone. Now at last Dakota stood before them, willing to take it on his shoulders. Samuel looked at his mother, torn between rage and longing. His voice broke when he spoke again. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you keep him from me?" Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "Because I didn't know if he'd ever come back. I wanted to protect you from hope that might break your heart." The room fell into silence once more. The fire hissed, the wind pressed against the walls, and 3 hearts beat heavy with love, regret, and the fragile beginnings of something new. Samuel did not forgive that night, but a seed was planted. For the first time, he had seen his father, not as a story, not as a ghost, but as a man. And though his anger burned bright, beneath it flickered something else, something that looked very much like belonging. Clara sat on the porch that night, the cool desert wind brushing against her skin, the stars scattered above like fragments of glass. Her hands were clasped in her lap, trembling though she held them tight. Inside the cabin, Samuel slept fitfully, his anger still hot, his question still burning. But Clara's heart beat not only for her son tonight. It beat for the man who had returned from the silence of years, stirring feelings she had locked away long ago. Dakota stepped quietly out of the shadows, his presence filling the night. He did not speak at once, as though unsure if his voice still belonged to her. His hair lifted in the wind, his eyes fixed on her with a depth that had once undone her completely. "You should not be here," Clara whispered, though her voice betrayed no strength. "Where else should I be?" His words were low, rough, but certain. "I came back for you." Her heart twisted. "For me? Or for the son you didn't know existed?" He moved closer, his shadow spilling across the porch. "Both. Always both. Do you think I could return for one and not the other? My blood lives in him, but my soul." His gaze locked with hers. "My soul has always been yours." Clara's throat tightened. Years of silence, of shame, of loneliness surged up inside her. "You left me," she said, her voice breaking like dry earth under weight. "You left me to carry the burden, to raise him alone while the world spat on us." Dakota flinched as though struck, but he did not turn away. "I left because if I had stayed, I would have brought war to your door. The soldiers hunted us. To love you openly would have meant your death. So I carried my love in silence, but I carried it still." She shook her head, tears burning. "Love without presence is just a memory, Dakota. I needed you. He needed you. I know," he whispered. His hand, scarred and strong, reached for hers but hesitated before touching. "And I am here now, not as the boy who once burned with desire, but as a man who knows what he cannot live without. Give me a chance, Clara. Let me claim your heart again." Her chest ached. Part of her wanted to throw herself into his arms, to surrender to the fire that had never died between them. But another part, the one carved by years of abandonment, screamed for caution. She had learned to survive without him. Could she trust him now? "Do you know what you're asking?" she said bitterly. "To stand with me means standing against them." She nodded toward the town, the people who had shunned her, mocked her, cursed her son. "They will never accept you. Or us." Dakota straightened, his jaw firm. "I have never lived for their acceptance. My people taught me that love and honor are greater than the judgment of cowards. Let them whisper. Let them scorn. If you stand beside me, their hatred cannot touch us." His words stirred something fierce inside her, something she had buried for too long. She looked away, blinking tears. "And what if Samuel never forgives you?" "Then I will spend my life earning his forgiveness," Dakota said without hesitation. "I will show him by my actions, not my words, that I am his father." And I will show you, every day, that I am your man." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and sage. Clara turned back to him, searching his face, the lines carved by time, the scars of battles fought. He was not the young warrior she had once known, but something deeper, something steadier. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "I don't know if I can trust you again." Dakota finally closed the distance, his hand brushing hers, firm this time, unafraid. "Then let me earn your trust, one breath at a time. Let me fight for you, Clara, not with weapons, but with my heart." The stars wheeled silently above them. Clara's tears fell freely, her chest torn between longing and fear. But when his hand wrapped around hers, she did not pull away. For the first time in years, she let herself feel what she had denied, the truth that despite the pain, despite the silence, her heart had never stopped belonging to him. And though she said nothing, Dakota knew the battle for her heart was not lost. It had only begun. The days that followed were heavy with tension, but also with something Clara hadn't felt in years: hope. Dakota remained close, his presence as steady as the rising sun. He worked beside Samuel, silent at first, then speaking in measured words. He hunted, brought wood for the fire, and offered the boy lessons in skill and strength. Samuel, though still wary, did not push him away. He watched, he listened, his young heart caught between resentment and the pull of belonging. Clara watched them, torn between fear and wonder. For years, she had carried the weight of two lives, her son's and her own alone. Now Dakota moved among them like a missing piece returned. And though she tried to guard her heart, she felt it softening each day. But the town did not soften. Whispers followed Clara wherever she went, sharper now, laced with venom. "She's taken him back," they muttered. First his sin, now his savage. Some called for her father to cast her out. Others muttered of danger, of war. Clara braced herself for the storm, but this time she was not alone. Dakota stood tall beside her, his gaze defiant, unbroken by their judgment. One night, Samuel returned home bruised, his knuckles bloodied. Clara rushed to him in alarm. "What happened?" "They called you names," Samuel muttered, his voice shaking. "Called me worse." I couldn't just stand there. Before Clara could speak, Dakota stepped forward. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned. "You fought because you carry fire in your blood. But strength is not only fists, my son. It is knowing when to fight and when to stand. Your enemies are many, but your spirit must outlast them all." Samuel looked at him, torn between anger and pride. For the first time, Clara saw her son listening not to her, but to his father. Later, when the house grew quiet, Clara stepped outside to find Dakota waiting beneath the stars. He turned to her, his face softened by the moonlight. "He is ours," he said simply. "Together, he will grow strong. Divided, he will always ache." Clara's heart clenched. "And what of us?" she whispered. "Can we mend what was broken?" Dakota took her hands in his, rough against soft, scarred against scarless. "Our love was never broken, only buried beneath years of silence. I cannot give back the days I lost, but I can give you every day I have left." Her tears slipped freely now, not from sorrow but from release. For so long she had carried fear, anger, and loneliness, guarding herself from hope. Now, standing in the circle of his arms, she felt the truth. She had never stopped loving him. When Dakota kissed her, it was not the desperate fire of youth but the steady flame of a man who had returned to stay. Clara melted against him, the years of distance falling away until there was only the woman and the warrior, bound by something time could not sever. The following weeks tested them. The town's hatred grew louder, but Clara no longer bowed beneath it. Dakota's presence gave her strength, and Samuel's eyes no longer carried only anger, they carried pride. For the first time, Clara saw her son walk with his head high, no longer half a boy, but the son of two worlds united. One evening, as the sun sank behind the mesas, Samuel stood before his parents. His voice was steady, though his eyes glistened. "I was angry because I thought you left me. But now I see you came back. That's what matters." Dakota placed a hand on his son's shoulder, strong and sure. "I will never leave again." And Samuel, after years of longing and questions, let the words sink into his heart. He nodded once firm, and for the first time called him Father. Clara wept at the sound, joy spilling over her like rain after drought. Dakota pulled them both close, his arms wrapping around the family he had almost lost, his voice breaking with emotion. "You are my home," he whispered. The desert wind rose, carrying their voices into the night. Around them, the world still judged, still whispered, still hated, but none of it mattered. In the shelter of each other's arms, they had found what the world could not give and could never take away: love, family. Forever. The warrior had returned. The boy had found his father, and the woman who had carried the weight of silence had finally laid it down. Together, they stood unbroken. Together, they became whole. Their eternal bond had been forged in fire, tested in silence, and sealed in love everlasting.